The Bible has a blind spot. It almost never talks about the elderly as vulnerable. On the holiest day of the year, we plead with God, do not cast us away in our old age. Yet our tradition rarely speaks directly about aging. At the end of his life, Moses says, I am 120 years old today, and I can no longer go out and come in. But just a few verses later, the Torah insists his eyes had not dimmed, his vigor had not fled. So which is it? Is aging weakness or hidden strength? Why does the Bible's famous quartet of the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and the poor, not include the elderly? Did ancient Jewish society simply assume the old would be cared for in ways we've forgotten? This week on Madlik, we explore how the high holidays themselves become a radical communal ritual for confronting aging and mortality together. We are also privileged to be joined by Yossi Hyman, director of JDC Eshel and the visionary behind Muni 100, an ambitious program working with municipalities throughout Israel to promote optimal aging and to increase the presence and participation of older adults in the public space for 100 years of life. Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on your favorite podcast platform and now on YouTube and Substack. We also publish a source sheet on Sfaria, and a link is included in the show notes. This week's Parsha is Vayelech. Moshe describes the debilitating infirmities of old age, and we explore care for the elderly in the Bible, rabbinic texts, and modern Israel, and even in our high holiday liturgy. Well, welcome, Adam, and welcome, Yossi. This is the last podcast of the year. Very special to have you. As I said, I was reading the Parsha, I was preparing, and when it said that Moshe could not get up and go outside, I thought of you. Because what you're doing, working with municipalities, is changing the architecture, the structure of cities around Israel to get people out. And I'm wondering if you can tell a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Muni 100 before we dive into details.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me here. My name is Yossi Hyman. I served in the IDF in the military 28 years, from simple soldier in the infantry till a division commander, and in my last duty I was the head of the strategic division. I retired 15 years ago from the military, and I became the CEO of Jerusalem municipality. And during the last 11 years, I'm the director of JDC Eshel. JDC Eshel deals with promoting optimal aging in Israel. We help the government. JDC is a very special organization. On the one hand, we are NGO, but on the other hand, we are working with the government, and we help the government, the ministries, the municipalities, and most of the organization in Israel to promote optimal aging. What does it mean, optimal aging? Optimal aging, one thing we can for sure know from each of us, that at the end of the day, we are going to die when we are 80, 90, 100, 120. And the big question is how we are going to live during our 20, 15, 10 years, 5 years at the end of our life. And we try to help the older adult in Israel to improve the way they are living during their life, and not just to add years to life, but even to add life to years. And we know from all the researchers all over the world that if the ministries, the municipalities, and the person itself would do the right thing, we can add many years from our life to be a better life in a good health versus moderate or bad health. And this is the ideal, what we try to achieve, to postpone the dependency of the person on the other, because we know when a person becomes in a nursing situation and he's more dependent on the other, his family, his caregivers and other, his life is less and less good. The ambiguous all over the world is that life expectancy has increased during the last 50 years, let's say in 20, 25 years. But on the other hand, the age of 65 to retire, 65, 67, when people usually retire from the workplace, doesn't change. And this is ambiguous because when a person after 65 still have 20, 25 years of living, to retire from to be employed, it's something that created a deterioration in a person's life, and you become more dependent on other. This is something against the idea of optimal aging.
So you can imagine how I was reading the psukim, and lately I haven't been getting very far into the parsha before the bells start to go off, and it says that Moses went and spoke these words. First thing I notice is it says Vayelech. We're going to say in a second that Moses can't go and he can't come back, but it says Vayelech, and he went and he spoke these words to all of Israel, and he says, "I'm 120 years old," which of course is the iconic age of living a full life. And he says, "I am no longer able to go out and come in. Anochi hayom lo uchal od letzeit ve'lavo." Being able to dictate one's own ability to move, mobility, is such a key item in aging, Rabbi, that I said we have to just touch upon this. And as I said in the intro, later on in Devarim, it actually gives a different picture. It says in Deuteronomy 34, "Now Moses was 120 years old at his death. His eye had not grown dim. His vigor had not fled him." So I was curious how the rabbis around that square, and Rashi says one might think that this was because his physical strength failed him. Scripture, however, states his eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. Rabbi, I think it was almost embarrassing to Rashi to think that Moses could not have his mobility. And so he starts to bring drash as to what this means.
The idea that Moshe needed a walker is not something he could imagine, right?
Absolutely. But again, we're diving right into the weeds here about perceptions and biases. So Rashi says, what then is the meaning of I cannot? Rashi says, I am not permitted because the power, leadership has been taken from me and given to Joshua. So again, the bias against Moses, as you say, being in a walker was so strong that he says, no, we're taking it metaphorically. Another explanation gives Rashi. He says, I am no more take the lead in the matter of the law. This teaches us that the traditions and the wellsprings of wisdom were stopped up from him.
Let me just say 1 second. People in Chumash don't get sick. The only person we know who's sick is Jacob at the end of his life. It says, "Hinei avicha choleh," your father is sick. It is interesting to notice that the idea of sick or getting old, it doesn't happen much. Yitzchak goes blind, but we don't see it very often, which is interesting.
And I wonder if, and we've discussed this kind of before, what you once said, I believe, that when you got sick, you didn't last long. That most sickness was critical, chronic, whatever the term is. Maybe that's the reason. I don't know.
I mean, that's the pre-penicillin of our Torah. That, the idea that you're sick for a long time that we have today didn't exist before there was medicine. So if you got old or you got sick, that was the end.
But I do think there are enough Psalms, for instance, where we cry out to God to heal us.
On Yom Kippur, we say, Al tashlichenu le'et zikna. Don't throw us to old age. So there has to be an idea like that.
But it is interesting that as we think about it, we have to pull straws. It's not so obvious. And I think that's part of the issue that partially we're dealing with in modern society. Things have changed. Maybe it was, Rabbi, especially with regard to the elderly, that we took better care of our elderly. Maybe we had multi-generational living under the same roof. Who knows? But let's explore the texts. And so in the Talmud in Sota, the word that he says is, I cannot go out and in, but he says, I am 120 today. So the Talmud in Sota focuses on that. And he says, on this day, my days and years have been completed to be precisely 120 in order to teach you that the Holy One, blessed be he, completes the years of the righteous from day to day, from month to month, as it is written, the number of your days I will fill. So this gets a little bit into the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur liturgy, because what we're asking for is, God, give us the allotted days and let us live our allotted days. There's almost this sense of kind of destiny that we live each day to the fullest. So here, this sense of our mortality, this sense of the fact that we start to decline is mixed into the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's a new year, and here the whole congregation, young and old, is together. And I must say, when I go to synagogue, I think back to when people used to go out for Yizkor. And I started to realize as my father got older that I was one of the oldest guys still going outside. And it just meant that being part of Rosh Hashanah, you see the generational cycle. And besides beseeching God and praying, we come into direct contact with our mortality, but also the frailty of aging. So, Yossi, you were telling us that you went from the army to working with the elderly. Tell us a little bit about what Muni 100 is and what you're trying to achieve.
So what is Muni 100? Muni 100 is a program with the municipality that try to promote optimal aging. It means how the municipality can influence the person that his life in his old age would be better, and at the end of the day would transfer years from moderate and bad health to a good health of a person in his 20, 15 years at the end of his life. And we study from many researchers that the municipality can affect the older adult by two main things. Muni 100 has two goals. The first one, in the individual level, we want to increase the presence, participation of the older adult in the public space, physically, socially, and financially. This is one goal. The second goal is that the professional in the municipality prepare the municipality for 100 years of living, advanced optimal aging. I can tell you that from my experience in Jerusalem municipality, but I can say about the other municipality, this is not in the high priority of the municipality to promote optimal aging, because municipality thinks about families, about young children, about education, about sports and other things, but not about optimal aging. And today, when life expectancy increase so much, the municipality should prepare itself to a 100 years of living. And you have to understand that today, I can say, every third child who gets birth today is going to live 100 years. So this is something I think all over the world, but specific in Israel, the government of Israel is not prepared for that, and the municipalities are not prepared for that. And what are the main indicators that we think that can influence the individual and the municipality as an organization? So in Muni 100, we want to promote three individual indicators. The first one is mobility. We want that the person would get out from his home And the goal from this indicator is at least once a day. The second indicator that we want to promote in the individual level is walking outside. Walking is the most easy way to promote optimal aging. It knows from many researches. And the goal for walking outside is 150 minutes a week. This is something that recommended by the World Health Organization, the WHO, 150 minutes a week, physical fitness in a medium or high intensity. And the third and last individual indicator is participation. We want that the person would take part in social activities with other, not through the internet, by Zoom or other, by meeting each other, doing things together. And the goal for this indicator is 2 to 4 times a week. And if we want that the person would go out from his home, walking outside and participate in social activities, the municipality should improve its physical accessibility, financial accessibility, access to information, and inclusiveness. It means that the older adult would feel better and part of the environment, that to prevent ageism in the level of the municipality, and so on. So this is Muni 100, and Anke said that Muni 100 is happening today in 20 municipalities and clusters all over Israel, include 7 of the large cities in Israel, which are more than 150,000 people, which are Jerusalem, Ashdod, Be'er Sheva, Netanya, Holon, Ramat Gan, and Tel Aviv, in 3 medium city, Bat Yam, Bet Shemesh, and Lod, in 4 small city, Ofakim, Kiryat Malachi, Kiryat Bialik, and Ramat HaSharon, in 3 Arab city, Sachnin, Rahat, and Shfar'am, and in 3 regional councils and clusters, Negev Ma'aravi around Gaza, Sorek Doromi, and Upper Galilee. It means that today, almost 40% of the older adults in Israel are part of the municipality whom Muni 100 is taking part in their municipality. One last thing before maybe you ask question that I want to mention, that part of the program is the policy that the older adult would be part of the leaders who decide what would happen in the city, in the municipality. And from that reason, we initiated a leadership of older adult, and we trained in all those 20 municipalities and cluster a group of leadership in each municipality, which are the partners in advancing optimal aging.
Rabbi, it's like eerie that when it describes Moses' infirmity, it says he can't go out. And the first indicator that Yossi mentioned was to go out of the house. Lavo means to have activities outside. I just loved it. And then, of course, there is this social aspect. You know, I have heard that McDonald's, for instance, has an issue with the elderly coming in, sitting at a table and staying there for 3-4 hours. People need that social ability. And I will argue that maybe one of the reasons, I'd love to know your input on this, maybe one of the reasons that the elderly is not included in the typical at-risk populations that the Torah always addresses, which is the orphan and the widow and the poor and the stranger, is because the elderly had those social institutions. I think back to my grandfather who would go to shul on a regular basis, and he went as much, the joke goes, Shimon goes to talk to Ruvain, and Ruvain goes to talk to God. The social element of congregating is so important. And even in secular society, you can get rid of the talking to God part, but you can never, God forbid, give up that social part. And that's why we call them a Beit Knesset, a house of gathering.
I like the word camaraderie. We go to shul for camaraderie. We see the same people, and and that's our community. And for sure, lo ucha. So, what you're pointing out. So, let's just review what we have here, since we listened to Yossi for a minute. The problem is that there seems to be a contradiction at the end of the Torah. On one hand, it says that Moses couldn't come in and go out. But in the next chapter, it says that Moses, he remained vigorous. So how can you remain vigorous but not be able to go in and go out? So Rashi, like you said, gives a drash that he wasn't allowed to go in and go out. But what we're suggesting is that with old age, you have trouble going in and going out, even if you're vigorous. That's what Yossi said. You can walk for 150 hours, but you have trouble. You have to be encouraged to do it. It's hard to go in and to go out.
And it's fascinating that, you and I, a knee-jerk reaction would be, if you want to help the elderly, create a one-to-one relationship, call on Mrs. Shapiro once a week, make sure that she has everything she needs. But what he's working on is the larger picture, the way our towns and our villages and our cities enable them to just, the simplest thing is to get outside, to spend X amount of hours outside. It's really kind of interesting that the solutions can be so material and that baked into them, where you have, I know in my town here in Connecticut, they're building sidewalks like crazy, because you get to the suburbs and you assume everybody is outside, but the truth is everybody's in their car, and you don't get outside enough. I was looking really hard, scratching my head about, does our society really honor the elderly? And of course, the first thing that I thought about is what it says in the Torah, that for mipnei seva takum, in front of the elderly, you should get up. And the fascinating thing, Rabbi, is that there's a really disagreement between our sages. Some of them say, yes, it is the elderly, and the others, it's in front of the wise, we revere old sages and wisdom so much that sometimes we forget about the infirmity part of it. In Mishnah Torah, positive commandment 209 is to honor the sages. Where does it get that? Mipnei seva takum. So I do think that Yossi is fighting, or I'd say working with municipalities. I think we have to be a little more focused in our society, whether we're secular or whether we're religious, and understand whether, as Yossi said, we're living to a much larger age. What did he give? The statistics are that if you're being born today, the chances are you'll live to 100. This is a big problem.
Statistic, isn't it?
Yes, it absolutely is.
Let me just say one thing about honoring the smart people. Of course, the sages, of course, the idea in Jewish tradition is that you get smarter as you get older. And so therefore, honoring the sages means honoring the sages who are going to be older, because the sages, to get so smart, you need to be older. They didn't know about child prodigies, really.
They didn't, but what I found kind of fascinating in all of these rabbis trying to understand the verses that we talked about is, for instance, I mentioned Ramban, but he says this was a miraculous event in order that Moses should not be troubled. In other words, that God took away some of his clarity so that he did not recognize what was happening around him. He did not recognizing that the torch was being passed on. I mean, they are addressing the issues that all of us face, and as you and I get older, we're facing them every Rosh Hashanah. It's not them; it's starting to be us.
Right.
I just find this fascinating that we don't spend enough time talking about aging, and that in fact a lot of the crumbs are being sprinkled right in front of us that can elicit these kinds of conversations. The other thing that I was thinking about is, yes, we do talk about in Tehillim, it says, "Do not forsake me when I get old." That is key part of the Yom Kippur liturgy. And I really do think it's a key part. I mean, it's the kind of thing that when you say it, you get a little choked up. You start thinking about the elderly in your life, and you do think about yourself as you're getting older, and you look to your children. It is a moment, I think. And Yossi is back, but what I'd like to discuss a little bit is what is the communal response to initiatives to help the elderly. I was saying, Yossi, that in our traditional society, my guess is 100 years ago, the elderly lived with the family. There was multi-generational living. And it's only in the so-called modern era that we have the issues of the elderly being alone, unattached, and we have to address this. I think in Israel, you have something fascinating also. The original Chalutzim, the survivors of the Holocaust, they came without parents. And so there's a learning curve as well in Israeli society to how we deal with this. We have all of this coming at the same time. So Yossi, if you could talk about how difficult it is in Israel to get the governments, the municipalities, and people in general to focus on the issue of aging.
First of all, to say that this is something that we have to give a compliment to the state of Israel from two reasons. First of all, Israel is a small country and is very family country. It means that in most of the time, when older adults, and most of them are not neglected by their family, the situation is good, and most of the families in Israel take care for the older adult, and in the holidays and in Shabbatot and the weekend and so on. Second, in Israel, much better than all the other Western country, the percentage of people who are 65 and above, who live in institution, and when I say institution, it means a geriatric center or a nursing home, is the lowest in the OECD. Just 2% of the people are living in institution. And why I think it's good, because we know from all the researchers that all the idea of אל תשליכני לעת זקנה and והדרת פני זקן, and the fact that the family and the society have to take responsibility for the old adult during his last few years when he needs others to take care for him, it's always better to live at home. What the world understood during the 60s, the terminology of aging in place mean as much as you can live at home and stay in your community and so on. That's why when Israel, just 2% of the older adult live in institution, this is something that we can say that in Israel the situation is not bad. Still, there are 7% who are neglected by their family, that we know from research in Israel, and we try to focus part of our program to identify those people and to try to take care for them. But I think that if we compare it to other nations in the OECD, the situation in Israel is not bad.
You know, I was thinking culturally, and I mentioned this before, that when we talk about the at-risk populations in the Bible, we talk about the almanah, the atom, the ger, and the ani. we don't normally include the kashish, the zaken. And I think maybe you kind of touched upon it, and you said that Israel, and I always love the fact that Israel is really a Jewish state and has kind of baked into itself the DNA of taking care of their elderly, whether it's living at home, whether it's, as you say, Shabbat and the Chagim. There is a secular organization called Yisrael Chofshit, and they want bus service on Friday night and Saturday so that kids can visit their parents and their grandparents. It's that important in our structural dynamics. So I do think that the answer to the question of why the elderly are not included in what we would call the at-risk community in the Bible is they probably were taken together. But as you said, society is changing, modernity is changing, the length of our years is changing, and we can't take this for granted. We have to be proactive. And I think that's what I love about what Muni 100 is doing, is it's trying to ensure that, and I love the variables that are important, getting outside, spending time with each other, and activity. That's more important than anything. What sort of results are you getting? How have you, I know you're doing pilots right now. What is the status?
First of all, we made the research when we started Muni 100 a year and a half ago. We made the research in all the 20 municipalities, and we asked more than 12,000 people about those indicators. How many times you get out from your home on a weekly basis, how much you walk outside, how many times every week you meet with other and make social activities. And we know exactly, first of all, what is the average in the national level of those indicator situation, and second, in each of those municipalities, which I mentioned before, what is the situation and how they far from the average of the national level. And each municipality has its own data and should put itself a goal where they want to, whether they want to be in 3 years from now during the program. They have to prepare a specific program which is specific for each municipality. You cannot compare between one municipality to the other, how they promote those indicators. And at the beginning of 2026, in 4 or 5 months from now, we are going to measure, again, we are going to make another research, what we call T1. The previous one was T0. We are going to have the T1 research, which can give a perspective to them for each of those municipalities. Do Muni 100 promote their goal that they want to achieve? By the way, this is the only thing that we haven't decided for the municipality. Every municipality decided about each of those indicators, what is their goal for the next 3 years. And by the way, we asked the older adult in this survey, what should be happen that you get out more from your home, that you walk more, that you participate more in social activities. And that is the basic for those municipalities to plan their 3 years plan to promote optimal aging in Muni 100.
So it's not cookie cutter. Every community has to decide for themselves. What I was struck by is, we live in a world where every month, every day is Grandpa's Day, is Hispanic month, Afro-American, women's this. I think in terms of elderly, you really can look at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as the only holiday in a religion where people confront aging in a sense. If you take away all the God and all the teshuvah and all of that stuff, ultimately having people confront, as Leonard Cohen said, who by fire and who by water, where we stand today, look back at our predecessors, how they lived their lives, look to our children, it becomes kind of a fascinating rite of passage every year that our religion has created for addressing the birthday of the world, but another year under the bridge. Rabbi, what do you think of that perspective? I think it becomes natural when you start looking at the liturgy a little bit.
I think that's absolutely right. And, that verse, Al Tashlichenu Leit Zikna, I just wanted to say, it's interesting, Yossi and Geoffrey. That verse in Psalms is in the singular. Don't throw me to old age. And in the liturgy, we change it to the plural. And I think, Geoffrey, that's exactly your point. And that is, it's not just worrying about me. I'm worried about everybody. I realize that aging is an issue that needs to be dealt with on a communal national level. And therefore, it's Al Tashlichenu. That's the jump. Tehillim, Ayin Aleph says Al Tashlicheni. But what we do is we say Al Tashlichenu in the plural. And that really, I think, summarizes exactly, Geoffrey, what you're talking about and all the amazing initiatives of Yossi. I'm going to let you guys continue this conversation. I'm going to wish everybody a Shana Tova, Happy New Year. Looking forward, 5786, Geoffrey. It's going to be a good year. Shana Tova, everybody.
But I do love what the rabbi just said is we have to do this as a community. And that's what you were saying about the municipalities, that every community has to determine what's necessary for it in order to address its needs.
I totally agreed with the rabbi portion. And I think that the face of any society is the way they treat the older adult. Poor people, you have 10%, 20% of the population. People with disabilities, you have 15% of the population. Each of us is going to be old adult one day. And that's why it's so important, because 100% of the population or those who reach to 65 are going to live many years as older adult, and the way that the society and the family, of course, read them, this is the face of the society. That's why I think that Kabed et Avicha and Imecha is one of the important mitzvot in the Torah, and it's even said Leman Yarichun Yamecha. The Leman Yarichun Yamecha is just written on two mitzvot, Kabed et Avicha and Imecha, and Shiluach HaKen. But this is another story.
I love that, but maybe Shaluach HaKen has to do also with intergenerational respect for the intergenerational. Yossi, your background in Talmud comes through. You can't hide from it. Once you and we studied in the yeshiva once, it never goes away.
Yeah, I don't try to hide it. I proud on it, and really, 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 yeah. So Shana Tova, dear Geoffrey.
Yossi, thank you so much. Shana Tova.